Hi, my name is Gibson, and I'm the co-owner and creator of the Personal Development School. This is your daily breakthrough video, and this video is about how to win back a relationship with a male dismissive avoidant, or how to salvage a relationship with this individual. So, to be quite honest, I have received so many requests for this, and I have probably been putting off doing a series about this information since day one. And the reason being is because, a couple things. Number one, I really don't want people to get into a situation where like you're winning somebody back who isn't willing to participate in the relationship in an equal way to you, right? It's not good to be in a situation where you're trying to get somebody back if they're not willing to do the work and show up. And so you're going to get in this video series, and I'm going to do a series for the male dismissive, the female dismissive, and then I'm going to go through every single other attachment style and how to make things work and the specific nuances for this. But it's going to be from like a real perspective. It's not going to be about how to manipulate somebody to be back in a relationship. It's not going to be, how to use psychological tricks and tools to get somebody to like you again. It's going to be about how to iron out problems and how to get seen, heard, understood, communicate differently, break through blocks that were showing up in the relationship based on this person, but in a healthy way, okay? So I'm going to put a disclaimer. You guys are going to have to listen to that disclaimer at the beginning of every part of this series, because I really want to highlight that. This is such an important piece of information. I've seen so many individuals over the years listen to like specific dating coaches, or the whole pickup artist thing online, and all these different dynamics of like how to manipulate somebody or how to psychologically reel somebody in. And that doesn't work long term, because then you are in a relationship where you are connecting to somebody through a mask, through a facade, through a whole bunch of psychological tools and things like that. And that does not make for a long lasting, fulfilling relationship. So what I'm really all about here teaching on this channel is like, yeah, if you want to work things out, if you want to break through problems, if you want to be able to communicate differently and connect more deeply and use psychological tips for that, beautiful. But we have to make sure that you are taking yourself into consideration in that process, that you're showing up in your truth and in integrity and authenticity, and that you're able to use those psychological tricks or tools to be able to create a dynamic where the other person can do the same. And this, unless you have these components alive in a relationship, in my opinion, relationships aren't even worth our time. Like, we better show up and feel good and feel like ourselves and feel like we're in our truth. Otherwise, we're just going to have some frustrating dynamics. So that's my disclaimer before I start. We are putting out a course in the school that's about key tools to salvage any relationship, to save any relationship. Not necessarily like from a win-back process, although I probably will add components of that, but again, under these very specific pretenses, okay? So I've probably literally had like close to 2,000 requests about this specific thing at this point. So here it goes. Okay, so one other thing I'll say, we are still doing a sale for our community, for everybody who's here right now. I know there's still a lot of like isolation and people inside and all these different things. We have courses that are now out about overcoming loneliness and reprogramming loneliness and what to do if you're in times of quarantine or isolation. We also have courses that are all about communication and scripting. And then we have another 28 or so courses on all sorts of different topics that basically deal with any area of your life in each of the 7 areas. Obviously with a primary focus on attachment styles and reprogramming your attachment style by engaging the subconscious mind. But every single course has workbooks, tips, tools to engage your subconscious in the process of transformation, because research has proven that we literally cannot change unless we engage the subconscious mind in the process and repattern, because conclusively the conscious mind cannot outwill or overpower the subconscious mind. So we're going to take that piece into consideration as we dive into this as well. And the last thing is, if you are getting value out of this channel, please like and share and subscribe. It supports me and it helps me to keep supporting you guys and doing whatever we can through here to provide hopefully daily free content for a very long time. So, okay, let's talk about this. So the male dismissive avoidant, and the reason I'm going to boil this down differently is I'm going to talk about like male dismissive avoidant and female dismissive avoidant, because they are different and they respond slightly differently. There are nuances, and I'll do the same thing for fearful, for anxious, and for secures, okay? So what you'll see from this, okay, is when you start this process, when you decide, okay, I'm going to try to salvage a relationship, or I'm going to try to win somebody back, the first thing I will always recommend that you do is, number one, sit down and set boundaries and set a deadline. If we try to win somebody back, or we're trying to get a relationship to work, if we don't have a deadline for how long we're going to allow that process to go on for, it's going to be very discouraging, self-defeating, and we're honestly going to, very likely be wasting our time on other things, right? Or that we could have spent on other things, like, working on ourselves and healing and growing and really priming and preparing ourselves for like the best relationship we could have, because we show up as the best versions of ourselves. So to begin this process, you want to be like, okay, based on the investment of time I already have in this relationship. So for example, if it's 6 years, maybe you spend, 3 months. If it's been 3 weeks, maybe you spend a few days, right? Like, we want it to be relative to your investment and to your level of care. So you need a deadline. And at the end of this deadline, if things haven't worked, if the needle hasn't moved significantly, if you're not seeing major progress and things changing, then it's time to be able to show up for that boundary that you've set with yourself first, and be able to go, okay, this wasn't working. I did my best. Now I can walk away guilt and regret free. So that's step one. Step two is, what are my actual boundaries? And what does this mean? Well, there's so much I could say about boundaries, and we have a whole course in the school on that too. But what I will say is, you want to start here by going, what am I willing to put up with? And what am I unwilling to put up with? What were my non-negotiables in the relationship? Because you need to be able to bring these things to the table in order to transform this dynamic as well. So if you go in, for example, and you're going to follow these next set of steps that I'm going to give to you, and you're going to start there, but you're not going to have your non-negotiables, and you're not going to insert your needs into this, and you're not going to communicate what wasn't working for you and what you need to change, then you're going to go into a relationship where you're just not happy. And what's the point of a relationship in the first place? It's to give us connection and fulfillment and happiness, right? Like, it's these things that we do are to create the feelings. The things that we want from a relationship are to create the feelings of well-being, joy, things that make us feel good. So if you're not going to show up for yourself, and you're going to try to use all these tools and then go into the relationship, and then it's not going to feel good, then it's the whole process is canceling itself out at the feeling level anyway. So what's the point? Okay, so you really want to be clear in step two here. What wasn't working for me that caused the relationship to break apart? Or if you're in a rocky place right now and things are not going so well, and you're trying to salvage the relationship, what's not working for you? And you need to get really clear, okay? Now, what I want you to do with that step two is, I want you to write out those very specific things, but I want you to phrase these things in a what I need format. So for example, if communication wasn't working out, that doesn't give you a whole lot to work with. You need to say, communication wasn't working out because we weren't hearing each other effectively, because we weren't showing up and actively listening properly, because we weren't validating each other's emotions, because we weren't, like, you need to know the why and really paint that picture. And then you need to convert that into a need. So that means what I need is active listening. That means what I need is emotional presence from my partner. That means what I need is, and then you're going to put that all into a nice little tidy column, okay? So you identify what wasn't working, identify it very clearly and specifically, like paint the picture of what that was, not just communication, but like us not facing each other and being present while we communicated. And then you're going to convert that into, so this is what I need going forward, okay? Your next step here, specific to the male dismissive avoidant, is going to be that you follow these specific steps for what they need. Okay, so you want to get really clear about what they need. You want to be able to present these things in a patient way, and I'm going to give you a bit of a time frame for what this looks like. And while you are presenting these things in a patient way, it is your job and your duty to yourself to be able to show up for yourself at the same time, okay? So you have to be able to insert your needs while you're working to understand their needs. And this is a very beautiful, powerful thing to do, because it makes our relationships fulfilling and empowering and inspiring, because we really get seen and heard, which means we can really receive love. And we really feel good about the dynamic, which means it can keep building momentum, and you can go through the different stages through doing this and achieve the bliss phase of a relationship. So when a DA has pulled away, Number one, they usually feel really misunderstood. So it's going to be very important that you show up and you work to understand this individual. Now, let's paint the picture of that. What does that look like? Usually they want their emotions to be understood and their point of view to be understood for what they were feeling and what caused them to pull away. So one of the first steps when you're trying to salvage this with this specific person is you want to be able to isolate that and let the person know that you understood what they were feeling and where they were coming from. So an example of this could be, hey, I'm recognizing you probably felt a little bit misunderstood in our relationship dynamic, and maybe that was around, and let's just say, for example, let's say they felt misunderstood because they were criticized often because they weren't spending enough time with you, okay? So let's see example. So maybe you say, I feel like you might have felt misunderstood, and I just want to acknowledge that I would have felt a little sad too and distant too if I were being criticized the way I sometimes criticized you for not spending so much time together. And I'm recognizing now what it felt like from your position, and I'm understanding things that we can do to create change, okay? Now, you may not start off by saying things we can do to create change. You just want to start by really validating their perspective, okay? Now, when are you going to do this? Usually you want to wait until, if you're out of the relationship specifically, usually you'll want to wait till around the 6-week mark of basically no contact, because this person needs to take time to process their feelings. And usually dismissive avoidants are more focused on just feeling free once they're out of a relationship more than anything else. And then the actual loss of that relationship sets in a little bit later on, especially because dismissive avoidants are usually actively repressing their emotions first. So you want to wait for a period of time. Then you want to enter in and be able to open up dialogue. You want to open up dialogue in a very light way. And you want to have this conversation when you build a little bit of momentum, okay? So you want to start by just reaching out, by sharing something. You can start by reaching out and just sharing that exact thing and just validating this person's perspective. Or you can do it once there's a little bit of back and forth in the exchange or the dynamic. It really depends on how long you've been in the relationship and how much of an investment there really was. If it was a very light relationship and it was just a certain period of time, a few months, you might start more light. But if it was a big relationship of years, then you definitely want to start with a deeper exchange. You definitely want to start by just saying, hey, I'm validating your perspective. Okay, so you want to pick a few things in there. And again, in the course, I'll go into this so much because there's only so much I can say in the video, but you want to pick a few things in there that you think this individual might want validated. Things that you think they might have felt in the relationship, why they might have felt it, and let them know you understand their need and their point of view. And you can show empathy by saying, hey, I would have felt, insert the emotion, sad, distressed, frustrated, irritated, agitated, whatever, when if somebody was criticizing me in that same way too. Or basically you're just validating what happened and that you understand their emotions in that very specific situation, okay? Now you want to do this once or twice around a couple specific things. And the next part here that's really important is you want to be able to tell this person or communicate to this person in some form, especially the male, that you have specific ideas and practical steps for how to not let this happen again. Okay, and so you would start this by saying, for example, I've learned from this situation that next time I could just express my need instead of criticizing, right? Or whatever potential solution you have there. And so what might be required for you to do is to look at these things and try to understand their point of view and what might have hurt them, and then think of how could I have shifted my behavior to change this and to make this a healthier dynamic in the way that I communicated, or in the way I responded to this thing, or in the way I reacted. Now, this is a beautiful exercise for any human being to do in any situation, irrespective of attachment style. It's really easy for us as humans to be like, oh, but this person did all these things and they did more and they did worse stuff, so of course I did that. Any justification of any behavior we undertake as a person, we just limit ourselves in our growth. So even if our part is this small and their part is this big, just as a human being, just to show up and even prepare yourself for future relationships, you want to observe your patterns and how you responded. You want to utilize that information. So this is important to note. Once you've had this conversation, okay, once you've identified a couple key things, you also want to show little tiny bits, little pieces of seasoning of support for this person, okay? Because dismissive avoidants really receive being loved as being supported. And so if you can encourage them, send a word of affirmation, something like this, you should get into a point where you're starting to build momentum. Now, you might not. And in that case, it's probably that the person is not really that interested in the relationship any longer for a number of different reasons. It can be that their interest in you is a 9 out of 10, but their negative programming about relationships and vulnerability is negative 10 out of 10. Or they're interested in you in a 7 and theirs is an 8, like, negative 8. It's not necessarily you as a human being. It's not necessarily like you didn't do something perfectly or properly. You have to remember, for this individual, you are constantly in a space where it is their interest versus their negative programming. And they're going to get this push-pull in the dynamics of their subconscious mind that's going to create a particular output. So your job here is to do these things without being attached to a specific outcome. Your job here is to practice these things and show up for yourself and do this work and see if it works. And if not, you've got your deadline in place and okay, good. Now I can walk away guilt and regret free, and it's going to help to give you closure in the process. So those are those next steps, okay? Season a little bit of support, okay? Now, once you've done that, your next piece is going to be to have a conversation. Ideally, this is face-to-face, but it can be over the phone as well. Ideally, it's not through text message. It could be an email, a sort of a last case resort. And what I would highly recommend in this space is once you've got a little bit of connection, there's a little bit of momentum built in, you've shown a little bit of support, and you've acknowledged your points of what you recognize and you empathize with about their perspective and what you could have done differently, because they love those practical tools. It's like, oh, I see hope from a very intellectual perspective, and this is how the dismissive avoidant responds, and that's how they process information, is very intellectually. So if you have these tangible, practical tools, it's very beneficial. So once you have that, now you absolutely at this step, I don't care how afraid you feel or how vulnerable it feels, it is so important. And please do this. Please, please, please do this for the sake of yourself and your own well-being. It is now your job to insert your needs and express yourself and say, you know what? In the act or in the name of me showing up and expressing my needs differently, and me showing up and having tools and doing the work, I'm realizing these are the things that I needed in the relationship. And here's some really great ways that we could have done this. And you want to have very specific strategies in there as well. So for example, if it's spending more quality time together instead of quantity of time, let's say there was a problem with time versus space. Maybe you say, you know what, I realized we don't have to spend every night together, but it's really the quality of the interaction that matters to me. So if we can put our phones away and just be really present and have the TV off and just chat, or just have more time where we're facing each other and really listening to one another, I could be okay with a little bit less time in the relationship. Now, that's just an example. You have to make sure that whatever you do suggest and whatever strategies you have, while taking that person into consideration as well, that's not you saying something to get a result. You can't, say I could spend 2 days a week and that's fine. And then secretly that once you're back in a relationship, you're going to want 5 days a week, because then you're just putting yourself back in a position where you're going to repeat problems. And that does not do any good for anybody, especially for you putting in all this work and then only to feel disappointed. So get really clear on strategies that you take the time, you feel into. Do these work for me? Are these things that would actually meet my needs and keep me happy? And take the time to assemble that ahead of time. And then work to communicate those very specific things. And then you want to get to a point where you ask the person, does that make sense? Do you think you'd be interested in doing that? If you're not exactly interested, is there a compromise that you could make or would be interested in? And the way you want to position this whole conversation when you do share this, especially if it's in person, is I'm expressing needs. I'm obviously interested in rekindling and communicating again and spending more time together. It doesn't mean we have to be in a relationship right away. This is if you're out of a relationship specifically. But what I would love for us to do is just to see if there's something that's workable, and to not put pressure on it, but to enjoy spending time together with these new tools, with this new awareness about our needs here. And I hope we can both create an environment that's supportive enough for us to both be able to speak up at any point in time if we have to tweak things or things need to change. And through that period or time frame, this is where and when you're going to want to practice communicating your needs, seeing your needs through, consistently speaking up, and really holding space and asking for that other individual to do the same and checking in with them. And it's wonderful to have like a weekly checkpoint of, hey, how are we? Are we meeting each other's needs? How are we feeling? How are we doing? And once you see a lot of momentum and things really building, then it's a great time to have this conversation. And it goes like this. Hey, I know that you might not be in a position where you're super excited about commitment and things about commitment might be a little bit scary to you. But I know that I'm in the place in my life where I'm truly looking for a committed relationship. And that doesn't mean we have to put all this pressure and all these expectations on it, but that's something that I desire and that I would like. So, is that something you'd be interested in? It doesn't have to be tomorrow, but is that something that you see yourself open to as long as our relationship keeps building, keeps growing, we keep having a good time? And if you have fears around it, I would love to know specifically what those are actually about. What meaning do you give to commitment? What are you afraid could go wrong if you make a commitment? And maybe we can just dive into having a deeper conversation around that. So you might say something along those lines. I kind of just like freestyled that on the spot, but you want to pick something that's really being able to isolate those fears, pull them out, understand them, bring them to the light, open them up and have communication around them, because that person is also going to be able to process that. And you are going to be able to not take that so personally. So that's sort of an overall framework. In the course, we're going to have a lot more than that, and it's going to be in the different stages of a relationship. Like if you were in the dating phase and this is happening, if you're in the honeymoon phase or the power struggle phase and this is happening, and specific objections that might come up and different things you can share or say. And in order to do that, I honestly recommend going through the advanced attachment style courses first if you're going to dive in, because they will prime you for talking about the 6 stages and understanding all that material and information. But this was what you guys wanted. I put this out here after so many requests. Please keep in mind that the entire process, again, is about you showing up for yourself too, taking yourself into consideration and having a deadline and having boundaries and seeing your needs through and communicating differently. And this is about salvaging a relationship or winning somebody back because you have really great tools in place to navigate a relationship, to thrive in a relationship, not because you're trying to manipulate somebody and achieve an outcome. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Thank you so much for watching this. Thank you for being here. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next part of this series.